All right, and we are live. Happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm hoping we get some viewers. I know it's a little early on the West Coast, almost lunchtime on the East Coast. But I guess we'll just get started and hopefully people will chime in. So happy Tuesday. My name is Rebecca Kaplan and I'm the Public Affairs and Social Media Manager for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Every year in the month of May, Clinical Trials Day is observed to raise awareness of clinical trials and to honor research professionals for their commitment and contributions to public health and medical progress. Here at the Foundation, we understand the important role that clinical trials play in the treatment of IBD, including Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And we also know that the idea of participating in a clinical trial might seem scary, but clinical trials play a really critical role in ensuring that we have a plethora of treatments available for patients. In fact, every single IBD medication that's currently available on the market had to go through the clinical trial process before it received its FDA approval. So really, if you're on medication for IBD, you are on medication that at some point went through a clinical trial. So to help break down the clinical trial process, I'm excited to be joined by Brandon Pomish. Brandon was diagnosed with Crohn's in 2014 and has been battling with perianal disease since then. In fact, since being diagnosed, he's been put under general anesthesia 20 times and undergone 8 surgeries related to perianal abscesses, fistulas, and fissures. That's when he decided to enroll in a clinical trial. So over the next 30 minutes, Brandon's going to share with you his experience with Crohn's, what led him to participating in a clinical trial, and how the trial has worked for him. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that the information that's shared during today's chat is meant to be educational only. What works for one patient may not work for another, so we strongly encourage everyone to consult with your physician if you're considering making any changes to your IBD treatment, including enrolling in a clinical trial. And lastly, if you're watching, chime in, let us know who you are, where you're from, and ask questions. And I see a couple people already saying hi, so hi to Donna, Vicky, and Jody. And with that being said, let's jump right in. So Brandon, can you tell us a little bit about your disease journey, starting with your diagnosis?
Sure. So like you said, at the end of 2014, I had a perianal abscess appear, and I had never had any. I had never had Crohn's before. I had never had any perianal disease before. So this abscess appeared out of nowhere. I went to a couple different doctors and was finally referred to a colorectal surgeon who advised me that the first course of action to treat the abscess was to cut and drain it. And that led to a waterfall effect of complications and issues just from that one incision. That one abscess morphed into a fistula that morphed into what's called a complex fistula. And that's what I battled with for nearly 3 years.
And so what led you to enroll in a clinical trial?
So after about 5 or 6 different surgeries to cut and drain the fistulas and the abscesses, I ended up being diverted with an ileostomy that had its complications with it. I had to have it revised, and I was in and out of the hospital. So I switched hospitals, and all along I was told that the ileostomy was only a short-term fix. It was a short-term accessory, if you want to call it that. I was told about 3 months I was going to have the ileostomy, and that's kind of why I was desperate for it, so I committed to it, but I was also assured that it was going to be short. Well, 2 years later, I still had the ileostomy on, and anybody with an ostomy bag knows that your life is completely turned upside down once you're not able to go to the bathroom the same way. So after many hospital visits, introduced to new medications that were supposed to take care of the fistulas, and after about a year and a half or so of still having the bag, I was out of options. I asked my doctors, I went to them and I said, you told me that this was going to get fixed in a relatively short period of time, and I still have a bag and my life is still not normal. So what are we going to do about it? And that's when I think the humility of my doctor came in, and she said, we don't measure the healing of complex perianal fistulas in days, weeks, or months. We actually measure it in years. And the worse the disease, the longer it takes to heal, no matter what the medical management that you go on. So after I was told that, I was pretty much heartbroken. Like the realization came in that I was going to have this disability for pretty much the unforeseeable future. So I went online that night and I started looking up different trials around the world to see what was going on to heal what I had. And I found about 6 different procedures going on globally that piqued my interest, that were specific to exactly what I was dealing with. And I honed in on one specifically in and they had been working on this this trial for about 10 years. And it had gone through, I think when I had first contacted the team in Spain, it was on their 3rd or 4th phase of the trial. So there had already been a couple hundred people who had gone through it. So the data that they had was pretty strong. There were other trials that were going on that seemed like they were a higher reward, but because this trial had so much data behind it, and I did my research on the doctors, the hospital system, I felt most comfortable going to this particular trial, and that's what led me to Spain.
So now, this was a stem cell trial, correct?
Correct.
What were some of your fears about enrolling in this trial?
Well, a lot of fears. One, it was out of the country, so, while I knew I was going to a country that was relatively civilized and wasn't a third world country, I had no experience in a European hospital or in in traveling and worrying coming back on an airplane for 10 hours. There's a caveat to that trial and a subsequent trial that I went through here in the United States, which I'll get to. But so this trial, I didn't have to go through the normal procedures that you would go through a trial here. Because I was not a European citizen and I was a United States citizen, I wasn't actually able to enroll in the trial. I actually had to pay to go and use their trial. So, the fear is I'm paying money to go do something that isn't guaranteed to work. And if something went wrong, it's not like I could hop in my car and go, drive 45 minutes or 4 hours to go see my doctor. I would have to hop on an airplane and fly 8 hours. So there were a lot of fears. However, I was confident that because of the research that was garnered through the decade of their work and the amount of research I had done into it. I had a high confidence that the 75% success rate that they were touting was better odds than what I was going through at the time, if that makes sense.
It does. And so as we're talking about concerns and kind of fears, we got a question from Michelle, which is, were you concerned with receiving a placebo when dealing with perianal disease associated with the Crohn's? Now, I don't know in a stem cell trial if there's placebos are involved, but I thought this was a good question to address.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, there was no placebo. It was all stem cell, all, matter of fact. It wasn't a blind study. Possibly the first phase of the trial was, but fortunately, I knew I was going there and I wasn't going to get a placebo. I knew I was going there and I was going to get the actual stem cells, and how I knew that is because in order to extract the stem cells, they do liposuction on you. So I had liposuction done in 10 spots, and I can tell you the pain that I went through with the liposuction. If they didn't use my stem cells after that on me, I'd be pretty upset because I was bruised for about a month and a half after that. I had to wear a pressure suit. So, no, there was no placebo in the trial in Spain, and I can talk about the trial that I also engaged in here in the United States, and I can tell you a little bit about that as well. So let me tell you a little bit about the Spain experience, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the experience here in the United States. So I went to Spain, and this is after about 3 months of coordinating between Spain and my doctors here, and making sure that my doctors here were on board with me doing this. Because if they weren't on board with me doing this, I wasn't going to go. Because my doctors here were my quarterbacks. I was the coach; they were my quarterbacks. And if they weren't going to approve the play, I wasn't going to go and do it. And because the doctors here knew of this study, knew the doctors involved, they had high confidence that this procedure would be something that would be the next best option, since it wasn't available in the States. So I flew to Spain. I met with the surgical team, met with the plastic surgeon who did the liposuction, and they extracted the stem cells from my fat tissue in the morning. I woke up around noon. The doctor came out with a vial with my stem cells in it, and he was very excited. He's been doing this for about 10 years, but he was acting as if this was the first time. It was really cool. He was really excited. So he showed me the vial of stem cells. They had cultured about 4 to 5 million stem cells, and they went back into the lab so that they could refine it. They put me back out, so I went under anesthesia, general anesthesia, twice that day, which was a first for me. And they injected the stem cells right into the fistula, right into the opening, into the fistula, both sides, because I had 2 openings, both on each side of my leg, so to say, that day. I came back to the States and went for an MRI about 6 to 8 weeks later, and the stem cell procedure had healed the fistula branch. So there's like a main trunk and then a branch, which makes it a complex. So it had healed the branch. It hadn't healed the main line, but my doctors at the hospital I was at were amazed that in that short a period of time that the stem cells were able to have that big of an impact. So that was in September of 2016. So I went back to Spain in April of 2017 for the second treatment. I knew all along that it was going to take 2 treatments for this to be effective. That's where their data was taken from, was from 2 treatments. So when I went back the second time, they didn't have to do the liposuction again, thankfully. They just had to, I basically went in, they put me under, and by that time they had cultured between 40 and 50 million stem cells. So they put me under, injected the stem cells right into the fistula opening, a little bit into the anus, and I flew home. A couple of weeks later, I was getting an infusion for my Crohn's, and I went to go to empty out my ostomy bag, and all of a sudden I started bleeding really bad from my fistula site around the anus. I freaked out. I called my surgeon and flew to the hospital where I was going, because at this point I was not seeing anybody locally. I was going somewhere with national presence. And he put me under the knife the next day, probed into the fistula, and I woke up and he said, "Unfortunately, Brandon, it looks like the fistula didn't heal from the second stem cell treatment, and it looks like it didn't work." So obviously upset, I asked, what are my options? Do I go back to Spain and see if they can do it again? And he said, well, no, now that you don't have 2 fistula branches, that you only have one, which is called a simple fistula, you can now enroll in a clinical trial that we're doing here at this hospital for simple fistulas. And I said, great, sign me up. So they had 1 spot left, and because I had made a name for myself in this hospital system with going overseas and getting recognition and so on and so forth, they slotted me right in. But it was a real clinical trial. It was one that I had to sign up for. It was a 3-year commitment. I had to fly back every 6 weeks for testing. It wasn't just popping in, paying some money, and getting the medicine. It was a legitimate clinical trial. This one also was not double-blind. It wasn't liposuction. So what they did is they did a skin graft or a fat graft, where they basically cut a chunk out of your skin, extract the fat, and they culture the stem cells that way. So because they didn't have my stem cells, I still needed to go and go under to do that. So I signed up, I did all the paperwork, and mentally made the commitment, which is just as big of a process as the actual commitment to do the trial, to be mentally prepared for 3 years of this, whether it works or doesn't. You've made a commitment, to help in this trial. So, I didn't have any other option at this point. I needed to get my bag off. And any way that I could, I would. So I signed up. I went to the hospital. I had my MRI, my pre-procedure MRI, and they did another test. It was an ultrasound. They did an ultrasound of my fistulas, which I had in Spain, but I hadn't had before here in the United States. So next day, surgery day, same deal where they extract the fat tissue, culture the cells, and then while I'm out, inject the stem cells in. So by this point, I think this was surgery number 18 or so, 17 or 18. So I'm pretty used to being on propofol. So I'm very used to being put out, and I'm very used to waking up to it. So when I wake up, I'm not really groggy. I know where I'm at. I know what questions to ask, I'm very aware of what's going on, whether that's a good thing or not. So before the procedure, they made an incision on my stomach where they were going to extract the fat from. So they put me out, and I wake up, and I know immediately, just instinctively, to feel for that incision, because I know that if the incision's there, that they most likely implanted the stem cells. So I wake up, and I go to touch, and there's nothing there. So I rip open my gown, and the circle with the surgeon's initials are still there. I freak out. I start screaming at the nurses. I start screaming at the surgeon. My parents are there. I start screaming at them. I say, "Get in here." I'm screaming expletives. I'm just going nuts. So everybody rushes in for Brandon to find out what's going on. And I go, what happened? Why didn't this work? What else could go wrong at this point? So the surgeon comes in. He says, "Calm down." And I said, "You calm down." He says, "You calm down." I said, "Fine, I'll calm down." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "We couldn't do the procedure." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, when we went to probe the fistula to find out exactly what we were dealing with, we found out there was nothing to probe. The fistula actually healed from the stem cell procedure in Spain. It just must have needed more time." And I looked at him, and I said some more expletives, and I called him a liar, and I said, "I want proof." I go, "I want to see the images. I want to see proof." So he brings over the computer, and he shows me the images that they took the day before. So they actually knew the day before that it was healed, but they wanted to put me under to really go in and probe and make sure it was. So you can imagine the emotions that I was going through at that point. I mean, I didn't believe him. Am I healed? Am I getting my ostomy reversed? So a lot of different emotions. So I didn't actually end up going through the trial because I didn't have to. However, the month preceding that, where I had to lead up to the trial, I was going through the trial because it was, mentally exhausting knowing that, every 6 weeks and every 3 months and every 6 months and every year you had all these milestones that you had to reach. It was, I was mentally prepared to go through that. So subsequently in November of last year, I was able to get my ostomy reversed because my fistula stayed healed. And, so far, I'm fistula free. That's kind of where I'm at.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm really excited hearing about that because I hear from a lot of patients who are experiencing these fistulas and are kind of at their wits' end because everything they've tried has failed. So to hear an experience from somebody who was in a trial and had success is really exciting. So I know you said you had surgery last year, so I just want to check in and see how you're feeling today. And obviously, I don't need to ask if the clinical trial worked for you, but how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling okay today. As far as the perineal region, it's good. I have no abscesses. I have no fistulas. I've been reconnected at my stoma site where the ostomy was for better part of 6 months. Having some complications with that, with blockages. I actually have a colonoscopy on Thursday to go in and see what's causing the blockages and determine whether it's my actual Crohn's disease or some scarring or somewhat with where I got reconnected. But no, last night I had a blockage. So last night and this morning has been a little challenging, but it is what it is. It's you just got to deal with it and be proactive about it. And that's basically what I'm doing. I contacted my doctors out of state. I let them know what's going on. My doctor locally is the one who's performing the colonoscopy and the MR enterography, and I'll report that back to my doctors out of state, and based on the results from the findings, determine what the next course of action is. But the tough part, the roughest part, is behind me so far.
So would you ever consider participating in another clinical trial?
In a heartbeat. I mean, if all options were exhausted and I wasn't seeing results in a timely manner, and I could find something that could produce results in a timely manner, I would absolutely sign up for it, because there's only so many options that are approved that you can get prescribed to you. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, especially with the stem cell world, that is still under trial that may work. It's not a promise, it's not a guarantee, but if something isn't working for you and your quality of life is affected as mine was, to me it wasn't an option whether I was going to do it or not. It was an option whether I could get access to it, and if I could get access to it, I was doing it. So absolutely, I would do another clinical trial, and even if I had to do the 2 or 3 years, and I know mentally what that commitment would be like, I wouldn't hesitate to do it.
Okay, before I ask you my last question, I'm just going to scroll down and see if we missed anything. And say hi to Jane and Linda. Hi, Ryan. And then we got another question from Michelle, which I think is important to share. So she wanted to know, what were the costs involved in doing the experimental procedure, and did your insurance help to cover any, being that it was experimental and out of the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't even go to my insurance. I made a couple of calls. They were not going to cover any of the procedure overseas.
What about in the U.S.?
What's that, sorry?
What about the one in the U.S.?
Oh, the one in the U.S., no cost. Yeah, the one in the U.S., there was no cost. There was no cost for insurance. There was no cost to me. Free trial. Yeah. And
that included your travel to and from the hospital every however many weeks it would have been?
No, the travel was out of pocket. The travel would have been out of pocket. Yeah, nope, that's a good question. The travel would have been out of pocket, but any of the medical work was, there was no out-of-pocket expenses, and it was not charged to my insurance.
Okay. I don't think we missed any other questions, so I want to end with, what would you say to other patients who may be struggling with deciding whether or not to participate in a clinical trial?
Well, you really have to look at your quality of life. I had several times during the depths of my disease where I had a lot of self-pity and was sitting there wondering, why me, but, like I kind of said before, if you're in a position where your quality of life is so highly affected by this disease and there's something out there that can help you or potentially help you, you have to be proactive and go search for it, because your doctor's only going to know so much, and the good doctors will admit that they only know so much. They can only give you so much. Really, it's on you to do the research, and I know that the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has a great resource section on their website where you can go and look at different trials going on around the country to see what's going on. If you're up in the air, just ask yourself, what's your quality of life, and are you willing to go the extra mile to improve it? That's what I did. Paid off for me.
Well, that's all the time we have today. I want to say thank you to Brandon again for sharing your clinical trial experience with us. Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I guess just if you've been going through this for a long time and you don't think that there's any hope, because this disease can absolutely take a toll on your self-confidence, your well-being, go out and do your research, please. There's a lot of good stuff going out there. That's all I got to add.
Well, if you're interested in learning more about clinical trials or finding one near you, you should check out our IBD clinical trials community. You're going to find patient stories like Brandon's. He is one of the people featured, questions and answers with professionals, different educational resources, a dedicated IBD clinical trial finder, and so much more. You can find the clinical trials community at www.crohn'scolitis.org/research/clinical-trials-community. We're also posting the link in the comments on this video, so you don't need to remember all of the URL and how it's spelled out and where the dashes go. And if you have any general questions about IBD, we encourage you to contact our IBD Help Center at 888-MY-GUT-PAIN or info@crohnscolitisfoundation.org. So that being said, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. I know it's a little on the earlier side, but we really appreciate everybody who watched and asked questions, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.